The creation of the powerful black community known as Black Wall Street was intentional. In 1906, Al Gurley, a wealthy African American from Arkansas, moved to Tulsa and purchased over 40 acres of land that he made sure was only sold to other African Americans. Writes Christina Montford in the Atlanta Black Star. Gurley provided an opportunity for those migrating from the harsh oppression of Mississippi. The average income of black families in the area exceeded what minimum wage is today. As a result of segregation, a dollar circulated 36 to 100 times and remained in Greenwood almost a year before leaving. Even more impressive at that time, the state of Oklahoma had only 2 airports, yet 6 black families owned their own planes.
Black Wall Street refers to the Greenwood district in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was a prosperous African American community in the early 20th century. Established in the early 1900s, Greenwood became known for its thriving businesses, including hotels, restaurants, theaters, and retail shops, all owned and operated by black entrepreneurs. The area was a symbol of black economic success and resilience during a time of widespread racial segregation and discrimination. The term, Black Wall Street, gained prominence due to the events of the Tulsa Race Massacre in 1921. On May 31st and June 1st, a white mob attacked the Greenwood district, fueled by racial tensions and false accusations against a black man. The violence resulted in the destruction of over 1,000 homes and businesses, leaving thousands of residents homeless and causing significant loss of life. Despite the devastation, the community showed remarkable resilience, and many residents worked to rebuild Greenwood in the years that followed. The legacy of Black Wall Street continues to be a significant part of American history, representing both the achievements of black entrepreneurship and the impact of racial violence.
Rosewood, Florida, is a small community with a significant and tragic history, particularly noted for the events surrounding its destruction in the early 20th century. Here's an overview of its historical context. Early history. Founding Rosewood was established in the late 19th century, primarily as a small, predominantly African American community. It was located in Levy County, near the Gulf of Mexico, and was known for its timber industry, particularly the harvesting of rosewood trees. The 1923 race riot. Background. The community thrived until the early 1920s, when racial tensions in Florida were high, influenced by the broader context of Jim Crow laws and racial segregation. Incident in January 1923, a white woman in a nearby town accused a black man from Rosewood of assault. This accusation led to a violent mob of white residents from surrounding areas attacking the community. Destruction. The mob destroyed homes, businesses, and churches in Rosewood, forcing many residents to flee. The violence resulted in several deaths, although the exact number remains unclear. Aftermath. Displacement. The survivors of the attack were left homeless and traumatized. Many relocated to other areas, and the community of Rosewood was effectively abandoned. Legacy. The events of 1923 were largely forgotten for decades, but they have since been recognized as a significant example of racial violence in American history. Recognition and reparation. Historical acknowledgement. In the 1990s, the state of Florida began to acknowledge the events of Rosewood. In 1994, a state commission investigated the incident and recommended reparations for the survivors and their descendants. Memorialization. Today, there are memorials and historical markers in the area to commemorate the victims and educate the public about the events that transpired. Current status. Community. Today, Rosewood remains a small, rural area with a few residents. The history of the community serves as a reminder of the racial injustices that have occurred in the United States and the importance of remembering and learning from the past. Rosewood's story is a poignant chapter in the history of racial relations in America, highlighting the impact of violence and discrimination on communities and the ongoing struggle for justice and recognition. Edenville, Florida, is notable for its rich African American history and cultural significance. Established in 1887, it is one of the oldest incorporated African American municipalities in the United States. Here's an overview of its historic racial context. Founding and early history. Incorporation. Edenville was founded by a group of African American landowners, including Joseph E. Lee, who sought to create a community where they could live independently and govern themselves. Community development. The town was developed as a refuge for African Americans during a time of widespread racial discrimination and segregation in the South. It provided a space for self-determination and community building. Cultural significance. Zora Neale Hurston. Edenville is famously associated with the writer Zora Neale Hurston, a key figure of the Harlem Renaissance. Her works often reflect the life and culture of Edenville, highlighting the experiences of African Americans in the early 20th century. Cultural heritage. The town has been a center for African American culture, with events and festivals celebrating its heritage, including the Zora Neale Hurston Festival of the Arts and Humanities. Racial dynamics. Segregation and discrimination. Like many Southern towns, Edenville faced the challenges of segregation and racial discrimination. However, its status as an independent African American community allowed it to maintain a degree of autonomy. Civil rights movement. During the Civil rights movement, Edenville served as a backdrop for activism and community organizing, contributing to broader efforts for racial equality in the United States. Modern era. Demographics. Today, Edenville remains predominantly African American and continues to celebrate its cultural heritage while addressing contemporary issues related to race and community development. Preservation of history. Efforts have been made to preserve the historical significance of Edenville, including the establishment of museums and cultural programs that honor its legacy. Edenville stands as a testament to African American resilience and cultural identity, reflecting both the struggles and achievements of its community throughout history. New Orleans, Louisiana, has a complex and rich racial history that reflects the broader social, economic, and political dynamics of the United States. Here's an overview of the historic racial context in New Orleans. Colonial and early history. Founding. Established in 1718 by the French, New Orleans became a melting pot of cultures, including French, Spanish, African, and Native American influences. The city's early economy relied heavily on enslaved labor, particularly in the sugar and cotton industries. Slave trade. New Orleans was a major hub for the transatlantic slave trade. Enslaved Africans were brought to the city, and by the late 18th century, they made up a significant portion of the population. Creole culture. Creole identity. The term Creole in New Orleans refers to a diverse group of people, including those of mixed African, French, Spanish, and Native American ancestry. This cultural identity emerged in the 18th and 19th centuries and contributed to the city's unique cultural landscape. Free people of color. New Orleans had a notable population of free people of color, who often owned property and businesses. They played a significant role in the city's social and economic life, particularly in the 19th century. Civil War and Reconstruction. Impact of the Civil War. The Civil War and the subsequent Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 led to the liberation of enslaved people in New Orleans. The city became a focal point for African American soldiers and activists during the war. Reconstruction era. During Reconstruction, African Americans in New Orleans gained political power, with several being elected to public office. However, this period was met with significant resistance from white supremacist groups. Jim Crow era. Segregation. Following Reconstruction, Jim Crow laws were enacted, enforcing racial segregation and disenfranchising African Americans. New Orleans experienced widespread discrimination in public facilities, education, and employment. Civil rights movement. The mid-20th century saw the rise of the civil rights movement in New Orleans, with activists fighting against segregation and for voting rights. Notable events included the integration of public schools and protests against discriminatory practices. Modern era. Cultural Renaissance. New Orleans has continued to celebrate its African American heritage through music, art, and festivals, such as Mardi Gras and Jazz Fest, which highlight the contributions of African Americans to the city's cultural identity. Contemporary issues today. New Orleans faces ongoing challenges related to racial inequality, economic disparity, and the impacts of gentrification. The city's demographic shifts and the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in 2005 have further complicated these issues. Conclusion. New Orleans' racial history is marked by a rich tapestry of cultural influences, struggles for civil rights, and ongoing efforts to address racial inequalities. The city remains a vibrant center for African American culture and history, reflecting both its past and its aspirations for a more equitable future. Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina, which struck the Gulf Coast of the United States in August 2005, had profound racial implications and highlighted existing inequalities in New Orleans and the surrounding areas. Here's an overview of the historical racial context surrounding Hurricane Katrina. Pre-Katrina context. Racial inequality. New Orleans had long been characterized by significant racial disparities, particularly affecting African American communities. These disparities were evident in areas such as housing, education, and economic opportunities. Geographic vulnerability. Many African American residents lived in low-lying areas that were more vulnerable to flooding. These neighborhoods often lacked adequate infrastructure and resources, making them particularly susceptible to the impacts of a major storm. The storm and its immediate aftermath. Impact of the hurricane. When Hurricane Katrina made landfall on August 29, 2005, it caused catastrophic flooding, particularly in predominantly African American neighborhoods like the Lower Ninth Ward. The levee failures exacerbated the flooding, leading to widespread destruction. Evacuation challenges. The evacuation process revealed significant racial and socioeconomic disparities. Many African Americans lacked access to transportation, financial resources, or information about evacuation routes, which hindered their ability to leave the city before the storm. Government response. Criticism of response. The federal, state, and local governments faced widespread criticism for their slow and inadequate response to the disaster. The perceived neglect of predominantly African American neighborhoods raised questions about systemic racism and the prioritization of resources. Media coverage. Media portrayals of the disaster often highlighted racial stereotypes, with images of African Americans looting contrasted with those of white residents being described as finding supplies. This coverage contributed to a narrative that further entrenched racial biases. Long-term consequences. Displacement. The aftermath of Katrina led to the displacement of thousands of residents, particularly African Americans. Many were forced to relocate to other cities, leading to a significant demographic shift in New Orleans. Rebuilding and gentrification. The rebuilding efforts in New Orleans raised concerns about gentrification and the displacement of longtime residents. As neighborhoods were revitalized, many African American residents found themselves priced out of their communities. Ongoing issues. Racial disparities in recovery. The recovery process highlighted ongoing racial disparities in access to resources, housing, and economic opportunities. Many African American communities struggled to regain their footing in the years following the storm. Activism and advocacy. In the wake of Katrina, grassroots organizations and activists emerged to advocate for the rights of displaced residents and to address systemic inequalities. This activism has continued to shape discussions about race, recovery, and resilience in New Orleans. Conclusion. Hurricane Katrina served as a stark reminder of the deep-seated racial inequalities in the United States. The disaster and its aftermath exposed vulnerabilities within African American communities and highlighted the need for equitable policies and practices in disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. The legacy of Katrina continues to influence discussions about race, resilience, and social justice in New Orleans and beyond. The Detroit Race Riot of 1967, also known as the Detroit Rebellion, was a significant event in the history of racial tensions in the United States. It was one of the most violent and destructive riots of the 1960s and highlighted the deep-seated issues of racial inequality, economic disparity, and social injustice in Detroit. Here's an overview of the historical context surrounding the riot. Background. Demographic changes. By the 1960s, Detroit had experienced significant demographic shifts, with a large influx of African Americans migrating from the South in search of better job opportunities in the automotive industry. This migration led to increased competition for jobs and housing, contributing to racial tensions. Economic disparities. Despite the growth of the automotive industry, many African Americans faced systemic discrimination in employment, housing, and education. They were often relegated to low-paying jobs and lived in overcrowded, under-resourced neighborhoods. Prelude to the riot. Civil rights movement. The 1960s were marked by the civil rights movement, which sought to address racial injustices across the country. In Detroit, activists were advocating for equal rights, better housing, and improved economic opportunities for African Americans. Police brutality. Tensions between the African American community and the Detroit Police Department were high, fueled by incidents of police brutality and racial profiling. The police were often viewed as an occupying force in predominantly black neighborhoods. The riot. Triggering incident. The riot was sparked on July 23, 1967, when police raided an unlicensed after-hours bar in a predominantly black neighborhood. The arrest of patrons led to a confrontation that escalated into violence, with crowds gathering and tensions boiling over. Violence and destruction. Over the course of 5 days, the riot resulted in widespread looting, arson, and violence. The National Guard and federal troops were called in to restore order. By the time the unrest subsided, 43 people had died, hundreds were injured, and thousands of buildings were damaged or destroyed. Aftermath. Impact on the community. The riot had a profound impact on Detroit's African American community, exacerbating existing economic and social challenges. Many businesses were destroyed, and the city faced a long and difficult recovery process. White flight. In the aftermath of the riot, many white residents left Detroit, contributing to the phenomenon known as white flight. This demographic shift further entrenched racial segregation and economic decline in the city. Policy changes. The riot prompted discussions about race relations, policing, and urban policy. It led to some reforms in policing and community relations, but many of the underlying issues of inequality remained unaddressed. Legacy. Continued racial tensions. The Detroit Race Riot of 1967 is often viewed as a pivotal moment in the struggle for civil rights and racial equality in the United States. It highlighted the urgent need for systemic change and the ongoing challenges faced by African Americans in urban areas. Cultural reflection. The events of the riot have been reflected in various forms of art, literature, and scholarship, serving as a reminder of the complexities of race relations in America. Conclusion. The Detroit Race Riot of 1967 was a significant event that underscored the deep-rooted racial tensions and inequalities in American society. It served as a catalyst for discussions about race, justice, and the need for meaningful change, the effects of which are still felt in Detroit and across the nation today.